6 episodes of Status Single with Shree, which is, as you know, in its second season where we are celebrating iconic single women. Single women who have been pathfinders, trailblazers, people who've burnt down the rules and, smashed the glass ceilings and just lived life on their own terms. We're a community of 74.1 million today. And this, as I keep repeating on every show of mine, was according to a census that was 10 years ago. The census that was supposed to be sort of conducted this year was put back because of the COVID. And I think when we do have the census figures next year, we will be inching towards 100 million. 39% of the female population of this country is single. And what a celebration and what a proud moment for me today on the International Day for the Girl Child is it to have a woman who I have been inspired by, I've looked up to, and I've almost venerated in my eyes. The one and only Dr. Mallika Sarabhai, all the way from Ahmedabad. Mallika, all my love and all my respect to you. And I thank you for being a part of the Women Who Inspire Me series. I know you're just coming out of a difficult ailment. Chikungunya, friends, is an epidemic, as Mallika says, much more sort of serious and difficult for people in Ahmedabad. But we've heard nothing about it on in the press or in the media. But today's discussion is much more interesting than chikungunya. uh, and I've just, I want to say this, Mallika, that, I first saw you perform many, many years ago as a young woman. I used to learn music from the late Srimati Girija Devi ji at the Sangeet Research Academy, Appa. And even when I was growing up, and because I was being raised by a young widowed mother who was single, Appa's life was hugely inspiring to me because she was a widow, who had come away from Banaras, raising a daughter who was also sort of staying with her. She was helping raise her grandson, and she was a matriarch. She wanted her students to become independent, to earn money, always demanded good payment for her students, for her musicians, so fair, taught us as young girls that, never ever perform for free, where your art, your kala is not respected. And I remember you performed at a concert at the Sangeet Research Academy many, many years ago. I remember Pandit Ravi Kichlu ji had introduced you. Yeah.
I remember
And
that.
you remember that? Yeah. And I remember
Mid
yes,
90s.
yes, yes. And I remember I was sitting miles away from you and you were enacting, I forget, I think it was Draupadi, but it could also be because I've read so much about Draupadi after that, that, my mind goes back there. But on stage, you were this powerhouse. And I remember just being in awe of you. And then, as a journalist, as a feminist writer, as a woman who today is the founder of a community of single women, when I wrote Status Single, our paths crossed. And I remember we met because you wanted to adapt one or two stories from the book into one of your moving dance productions. And I just thought it was so karmic because I remember a conversation that I had with Appaji about you, where she spoke about your mother and she called her sister. She said, "My behen Mrinalini." That was so wonderful. Back in the time, these classical musicians and dancers who were women were so united. They stood for something. I think modern day feminists can learn so much from Appaji's generation. So I begin today's Adda, as I called it, our show, our Robibarer Adda. In Calcutta, the Adda, the Sunday Adda is legendary. And I begin with a note that came to my inbox, a note from a woman, a daughter like you, a daughter like me, an only child, who wanted to perform the last rites for her late mother. And she was told by her uncles, by her two mamas, who were also old and sort of, they were the patriarchs of the family, that no, you can't do this. So her younger mama's son performed the, the last rites. And she wrote to me, and I'm going to read that to you. Just after my mother died, I came across an interview which was accompanied by a photograph. My icon, the woman who had inspired me throughout my youth, Dr. Mallika Sarabhai, who is a guest on your show this evening, Shree, was performing a dance before her mother's deceased body. I kept a printout of that article, a printout of that photograph which I had framed. It stands next to my mother's even today. I would want you to tell Dr. Sarabhai that I so wished it was me in place of her that night when they took my mother away. I wanted to tell her that when I saw and when I read that piece on her, I wanted to be her all over again. Can you please ask her about that moment in time, what it meant for her as a feminist, as a woman, as a daughter? And tell her that to generations of women like me who were told what to do, how to speak, and how we cannot light the funeral pyre of our parent, it was the ultimate act not of resistance, but of respect and honor. It's giving me goosebumps. She wrote so movingly. Her name is Shumona. She writes all the way to us from Bombay. Um, Therefore, I think this sets the pitch for tonight's Adda. Tell us about that moment, Mallika.
Hi, Shimona. Thank you for that very beautiful letter. I'm often asked how I don't lose courage in fighting for justice and in raising my voice for people who can't raise their voice. And a single letter like yours is the answer why I don't shut up, why I don't become a cynic. So thank you. You have brought tears to my eyes.
I'm emotional too.
I have to go back over 40 years to start that answer. We were very fortunate in my family, in the Sarabhai family, that we were not brought up as gender. We were brought up as people. And even from the time of my grandfather, he was an industrialist, he was a industrial magnate. And in his will, the 5 daughters and 3 brothers were treated the same. The girls were given as many opportunities as the boys to blossom and become their own people. So by the time our generation came around, I didn't even know that in the world girls and boys were treated differently. Because my mother was a professional, Papa was a professional, most of the women in the family were professionals. When my father died very suddenly on December 30th, 1971, my brother Kartikeya was in MIT studying, and we knew that the funeral had to be the next day, and Kartikeya tried to come back but got stuck with a snowstorm in Italy. Had he come back, both of us would have done the cremation because we were both children and we thought this was the last intimate act of a beloved. Kartikeya couldn't come back, so I did it. And there was no question from anybody in the family of the propriety of it. In fact, they would have been very surprised had I not automatically assumed that I would do it. When Amma passed away 5 years ago, 4.5 years ago, we decided to decorate her body as she would dance. We put gungrus on her. We put the Bharatanatyam jewelry on her. We did her hair with flowers and we put her in a bright red sari. And we took her to Darpana because that was her life. And my musicians started singing songs that were her favorites. And one of them is a Telugu song called Krishnani Begani Baro. Krishna, come and show me your face. And one of my ex-students looked at me and said, dance. And without even thinking about it, without planning it, without anything, I just got up and danced because it seemed the right thing to do for somebody who had spent her entire life thrilling in dance, celebrating dance, really coming alive only when she was dancing. What more gesture of love could I show? We are ruled by patriarchy. We need to take the decision that we don't care what people say. Why should we care? This is between you and your mother. Does it really matter if your uncles don't ever speak to you again? That's the question. How much do you depend on the approval and nurturance of this patriarchal, farcical, and unjust society to be yourself? That really is a question that not only single women certainly, but I think all women need to ask themselves, what do I give up in my life, in the flowering of my life, in being who I am, in following rules that I disagree with, that I think are wrong? And I think having taken that decision, one faces consequences, but there are also consequences of living a lie. And I think living one's entire life as a lie is much more dangerous, much more poisonous than being oneself and taking the consequences for being true to oneself. I'm sorry, that's a long answer, and I've cried in my first question, but
Now, I cried too when I read the letter in the afternoon. I actually cried. I sort of sobbed. It was written so movingly. When I was researching on you for this show, reading up more on you, wanting to know more about your life, I read a beautiful mention of your late mother. And I find this extremely interesting because you've said in that interview that um, your late mother used classicalism to speak on subjects that she felt deeply concerned about. And in 1963, when she came to start learning Gujarati, she received or she read the news on what we today call dowry deaths. And the news was about young girls in Kathiawad who, soon after their marriage, their weddings, on which lots of money was spent, there was a lot of social hoopla around it, jumped into the well and died by suicide. And she was horrified. She was aghast, and she was also extremely pained by that. And she crafted a piece in Bharatanatyam that you refer to as a seminal piece of the journey that dancers subsequently took, because she used a language of classicalism that only spoke of love and viraha and shringara ras and beauty and pining and waiting, to speak about something which dancers would rarely tread, which was the violence and the gross human rights violation and injustice against women. Tell us about, recently you had shared this beautiful song by your aunt on Facebook, which so many shared. And tell us about, I've always found that extremely, I find that story extremely important because I rarely find these stories in classical dance, where are the stories of the Shupranakas or the Ahalyas, very rarely done. So tell us about, if you sort of saw your mother transform through her art into the fierce feminist that we all respect her and love her to be.
like I said, that when I was growing up, I didn't realize that girls and boys were treated differently in
Yeah.
society.
Yeah.
And I also went to a school called prayers run by my paternal aunt that Madame Montessori had come and started, And it was a school where I didn't realize that people were treated differently because of their caste or their religion or because they were a boy or a girl and so on. So this cuckoo land that I lived in. Similarly, I lived in a cuckoo land which I believed that every single artist uses their art to talk about injustice. And it was much later when I became a professional dancer that I realized what an exceptional step Amma had taken
Taken.
in showing ugliness and violence through a language which communicated without barriers of prejudice being set up. If I go into a class of young men and say, I want to talk to you about why taking a dowry is wrong, their walls are going to go up and they are not even going to hear what I'm saying. But if I go and I'm performing and somewhere either subliminally or even more blatantly, but very beautifully and aesthetically and powerfully, I speak of these issues, somewhere something is going to stick. And somewhere they are going to not be able to treat it in the same way as before that. And perhaps that thought will become more than a thought. Perhaps it will become a discussion. Perhaps they will discuss it with 5 people. You know what I heard Mallika Sarabhai perform the other day? She said that. She said that Ahalya was as much a pawn in patriarchy because Indra got off free. And Ahalya is told that she's blessed because she was turned into a stool for 1,000 years and because she was kicked by Rama. She was blessed. So I mean, what kind of story is that? So yes, in many ways, I took from Amma the fact that the arts were an extremely powerful language to convey thoughts that perhaps 1,000 years ago or 500 years ago or whenever it was that we believe Bharatanatyam in its form today or the lyrics in their forms today were born, perhaps religion and spirituality were the most important issues. But we have a language and we must use it to change society for the better. If you are concerned, if you are only concerned by how beautiful I look, then sure. But it was not again till much later, after I actually came out of Mahabharata, that I realized that I wanted to create. Till then, I was always Amma's best plasticine, that she would create and I would be the mold on which she would create. And I always felt I couldn't create. But then I became so desperate to say what I had to say that I became a creator. I was forced to become a creator because what I wanted to talk about was not what was being written or imagined by people that I could find.
In 1989, you conceived and created, I would think, the first of your really hard hitting solo theatrical works called Shakti, The Power of Women. Since then, of course, you've acted, directed, produced, scripted numerous stage productions, which have been sort of, I would think, instrumental in highlighting critical social issues and advocating change. Most of them on women, social causes, governance. Your role, what do you think, Mallika, has been your role in changing the concept of dance drama in modern India? Right from the storytelling to the choosing of themes. Like you said, that I mean, your mother doing it would have seemed very like, oh, this is what's done. But what was that point when you realized that no, Amma was probably a path breaker. She showed a certain way, and she was a rebel. And at what, tell us about Shakti, The Power of Women, because I think a lot of people who follow you almost sort of associate you with this production, which has gone on to win international audiences and so much of love and acclaim.
Okay, so I went into performing with Peter Brook in the Mahabharata in 1984 when I was already getting a lot of international acclaim as a soloist in Kuchipudi and Bharatanatyam. Uh, I started touring in 77, and for the first couple of years, every time I got good reviews, or every time I got a lot of audience applause, uh, it was said that Amma must have pulled some strings.
Hmm.
After the first 2 or 3 years, it becomes difficult for people to say Amma must have pulled the strings.
Strange.
So by 1984, I was accepted as one of the rising stars, as they used to be called, of classical Indian dance.
Hmm.
And I went into the Mahabharata as the only person in the entire cast of 22 countries who was not a professional theater actress.
Hmm.
I was also the only Indian, and I was also the only professional dancer in the company.
Hmm.
Peter Brook, I was also the only person who didn't dance in the entire production
Hmm. Hmm.
because he wanted to introduce me as a serious tragedian actress.
Hmm.
Anyway, doing the Mahabharata and performing my interpretation of Draupadi in many, many countries for over 5 years, I realized for myself the power of storytelling or performance
Hmm.
in changing something as deep rooted as patriarchy in women's minds.
Hmm.
Women become the karta of
Yeah.
patriarchy. The
So
famous
misogyny is internalized by women.
That's what I'm saying. So,
Yeah.
and I realized that it didn't matter which country women came from, they somehow related to the duvidhas that Draupadi faced
Hmm.
as somebody who was intellectually very powerful,
Hmm.
who was ethically very strong,
Hmm.
who had been put into a situation, who had to tell her husband Yudhishthira that I have great respect for you, but you are a weak man.
Hmm. Hmm.
And this juxtaposition of strength and vulnerability,
Hmm.
of ethical truthfulness, not contradicting the fact that she loved him.
Hmm.
I think very few of our mythological women have been allowed the freedom to be this. They have been reduced to Savitri, who is seen as not wanting to live if her husband died,
Hmm.
or Sita, who is seen as the one who would jump into a fire. But if you
Hmm.
actually look at these mythological characters, they have become a caricature of themselves.
Hmm.
So when I came out of 5 years of the Mahabharata, I thought making women realize that they can change their status is a very important thing. And making women realize that they are the pawns, the foot soldiers of the patriarchy of which they are victims
Hmm.
is very important.
Hmm.
So I went around directors and people I knew and tried to explain what I wanted to create. I wanted to really show in Shakti that it is language on the one hand, and the way that language is used that puts fetters on women.
Hmm.
So, for instance, you have a word like bal, which is strength, but a woman is referred to as abala. Even Mirabai says, Muja abala ne.
Hmm.
Okay, so you are immediately reducing her to weakness.
Hmm.
And if you look at language, there are hundreds of words which, as against the word woman, in which man forms a part of woman,
Hmm.
in most other terms, you take away from the man and the reduction is the woman.
Hmm.
I wanted to show through mythology, through middle history, and through current times how everything from the history book to the current version of the Ramayana to the way the news was reported in our newspapers
Hmm.
reduced women on a daily basis to
Hmm.
becoming victims, survivors, lesser than, in a race for being like a man.
Hmm.
And so Shakti was born out of that. I couldn't find anybody. And I had a good friend and a colleague called John Martin who said, well, then you write it,
Hmm.
which is how I became a creator for the first time. I wrote it with him, with his help. We created the characters, I researched it. And then the question came, should I stick to only dance or only theater? And I said that, listen, I have I have studied theater, I studied dance, I studied puppetry, I sing. Why should I reduce it to being either this genre or that genre or that genre. If I need to do all of that, then I will do all of that. And I remember very clearly my colleagues in the dance world saying, Mallika, you're going to risk suicide by doing this because you are very well known as a classical dancer. Don't go into this, nobody will accept you. And I remember saying, I have to do what I have to do. This is what I have to do. I'm not going to stop being a classical dancer, but what I consider my work has to be in this field.
I'm just thinking about Shakti, the power of women. And I'm thinking about how you've always, or at least a lot of the times, you've literally, how do they say? I mean, there's a term, right? You've destroyed it. You've reinterpreted it, and you've like remolded it in a way that perhaps it was not even written. You know, and you've given us the lens through which to even see Draupadi anew. Because we've had so many interpretations of Draupadi in books, in films, in different dance dramas. You use a lot of mythology. Now, just considering the political climate of the country now, where there is this religious divide, there is this continuous, communal sort of energy being thrust into our faces. Secularism is just, I think, a word. It's a rubber stamp. It doesn't mean anything anymore, at least. What do you feel is the role of mythology in modern India as a dancer who's continuously used mythology and reinterpreted it to empower women? How do you feel in the current political environment, Mallika, about our texts, because you've done so much of research on them as well over the years?
But two or three different aspects of that question. One is that Hinduism is the only religion which is not a religion of the book. What does that mean? That Christianity gets defined by the Bible. The Bible says this is right, this is wrong, you can do this, you can't do this. Islam by the Quran. Judaism by their book. Which meant that somebody, in most cases, an old man with a big white beard, decided how each of us must behave. And the question of interpretation, the question of a personalized relationship with truth or goddess or Devi or God, whatever you call it, was only possible in Sanatan Dharma. To me, the tragedy of Sanatan Dharma in this transformation to Hindutva is that the people who have propagated Hinduism as Hindutva have Islamicized it, because they have laid down rules which says this is right, this is not right, a woman can do this, a Dalit can do this, a Brahmin can hi, do everything, etc. This is an Islamization, a Christianization of my philosophy, and I resent it. Till a few years ago, today as well, if you go into a rural area, there will be people who are doing a ritual to a stone or to a tree or to a stump, and they are part of the Sanatan Dharma fold, because I will see my spirituality wherever I want. There are no rules. There were no middlemen. Today it's become about middlemen, and these middlemen can be politicians and they can be so-called dharma gurus, a lot of whom are now in jail for raping women. But who are these middlemen who will tell me how I can reach my eternal self, my Paramatma, whatever name I want to call it? So that's my view on what is happening in Hinduism. And you see, because it is convenient, आप मंदिर में जाके 10,000 रुपए दे दो, आपका बच्चा पास हो जाएगा. It's become a market. And it's easier for today's human beings to deal in a market rather than deal in philosophical question about who am I, what is my truth, Tattvamasi, and so on and so forth. Because we have become consumers. Today we are consumers of Hindutva, a lot of us. Today we are consumers of what our priest in our temple says. He says 1 crore का अभिषेक करो, तो आपके 7 पीढ़ी के सब पाप मिट जाएंगे. That's easier for me to do than to question myself, is this correct what I am doing? Is it my dharma what I am doing? Which is what Sanatan Dharma is about. But it's too damn difficult. It's easier for people. But they have also taken away the very personalized thing. I have met women. I remember dancing for a film in the Chidambaram temple in 1980. There was a woman there, obviously a widow, with her head practically shaved, wearing a rag, and she had a stone. This is Chidambaram Shiva's temple. She had a black stone, and she would scrub it and scold it, saying, "Who are you to put me in this halat? What have I not done for you? For years I have been praying to you. What is this nonsense? Shall I throw you away?" No, that is her love for Shiva. Who are you to say that it has to be put in a gold crown and done tung, 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 arti? This is her devotion. This is her love. She believes that her Paramatma is somebody so inside her that she can have any conversation. That to me is the strength of our religion, Sanatan Dharma.
Right.
That apart, mythology wasn't also created at one point of time. If you take the Ahalya story, because you mentioned Ahalya earlier, over 1,000-year period, depending on whether Vishnu was the supreme god or Shiva was the supreme god or Devi was the supreme goddess, punishment meted out to Indra differs. What Ahalya's role is differs. Whether she actually had a glad eye for Indra or whether she was completely innocent, whether she was somebody who was compliant to her husband or whether she actually wanted to experiment. All these things change. Ramayana has 300 known versions. We are being beaten on our heads because we think that the Tulasi Das Ramayana is the only valid Ramayana. Book, again, trying to follow one book. It's against our philosophy, it's against our religion. So, for instance, if I am re-examining Sita in Sita's Daughters or Savitri in a piece of mine called In Search of the Goddess, I am doing what mythologists have always done, which is I am reinterpreting her through our perspective today and for our time. But it's not coming out of nothingness. It is coming out of reading hundreds of versions. Tell me, if Sita was such a disempowered woman as we make out to be, so that in Ayodhya, all we have been able to give Sita is a kitchen, Sita's Baudi, as though she was a chef or something, why would Rama be called Siyaram? Sita's Rama. So she must have been an empowered woman. She must have been empowered. Even today, people say Jai Siya Ram Ji ki. This Jai Shri Ram is a militant, chest-thumping Hindutva version of it. Because in today's Hindutva, women are reduced to nothingness. Women are reduced to completely being disempowered. And it is a very masculine, male, upper-class Hinduism that is being shoved down our throats. So mythology, yes, I think my Sita is as valid as anybody else's Sita. And no, I will not accept that there is only one Sita.
Yeah, yeah. So when you perform Draupadi, over that period of time, 5 years, doing one role, one character, in different languages, speaking, communicating with different audiences, different countries, and then doing it in your own country. How did you transition as a woman? Because, as an artist, I often find this that, when I look at the heroines of my book, I can almost see how I've grown with them.
Of course.
Everything, yeah. So every transition that I went through, my politics, the politics of my being, the politics of my sexuality, the politics of my, what I feel towards my family, the politics towards my industry, my country, everything I see, I see in the books also in some form. Because you played Draupadi for 5 years, Mallika, and to diverse audiences, I'm curious to know, how did you transition through that process? What was happening in your life at that time? And was it mirrored in the Draupadi who you became on stage?
I think that both artistically and as a militant um, person, that happened during those 5 years.
Hmm.
Uh, in many ways, it was an intensely lonely period because for the first time in my life, I was cut off from anything that was nurturing.
Hmm.
I was so much a amma baby that I even refused to go abroad to college because I didn't want to leave amma and go.
Hmm.
And suddenly I was thrown into a milieu, foreign language, which I didn't speak, first time mother with a newborn baby, uh, telephones which took 3 days to get through home,
Yeah.
no email, no nothing, no SMS, nothing. A very harsh winter and a role that required tremendous resilience.
Hmm.
I was not getting on with Peter Brook.
Hmm.
I was very much a loner in the group. Everybody else was a professional actor.
Hmm.
They had been in the field of acting.
Hmm.
Revanta was a baby. I was breastfeeding him. We were rehearsing 18 hours a day in an unheated studio in a building that was being built on the 8th floor. And I would have to walk up I had a nanny, but
Hmm.
I would have to walk up the 8 floors with Revanta,
Oh.
take breaks to breastfeed him, uh, and then go into this hostile environment. There was hostility because I was the only Indian,
Hmm.
because everyone felt that I would question and I would bring in something that put them at a disadvantage.
Hmm. Hmm.
So the first few months were intensely difficult. And I kept saying to myself, why am I here? What am I doing here? Why am I putting myself through this hell when I feel that the director thinks I'm hopeless? My sense of self is being destroyed. I am lonely, I am alone, and I hate every minute of it.
Hmm.
I have been nurtured in a situation where I have always loved what I do,
Hmm.
and Ananda is what drives me.
Hmm.
And Peter comes from this methodology where you need to destroy yourself before recreating. And we would have these arguments, and he would say, you have to destroy yourself. And I said, I don't want to destroy myself. I can be Draupadi without destroying myself. So I had to fall back on internal resources. I had to grow internal resources.
Hmm.
I had to grow a voice which said, I have to say what I have to say, and I have to say it the way I want to say it.
Hmm.
I had to stand my ground. In interpretations within the women characters in the Mahabharata, I had to stand my ground. I not only had to stand my ground, I had to show it with evidence. So, for instance, I was always trying to get through to Amma on the phone to say, send me this interpretation of Kunti's character, or send me Iravati Karve's interpretation of the main character, whatever. And then I would get this book, or I would get cyclo-style pages, and I would go to the writer and the director, and I say, here, this is why what you are doing is wrong. So I couldn't fall back on family, tradition, loved ones to support me. And I think that's what made me, and made me as a performer as well. That I came out having lived through my fire
Hmm.
for 5 years, and realizing by the end of the first year that I was bringing something special to the production,
Hmm.
that my interpretation was bringing something to women. And that was, in some senses, the molding of what I became.
I find that absolutely fascinating because sometimes when you even read interviews of an artist, it's largely their body of work which is dissected or talked about or eulogized. It's always fascinating for me as a woman and as somebody who also has an interest in women, their life stories, our complex trajectories, to know, like you said, I mean, you went through fire. I mean, that itself, I think, would have just added so many layers to your performance. Um, Tell us about your this funny interview that I this little nugget that I found about you, where you talked about Amma once again with so much of love, and it reminded me of me and my mother. And you said that you'd always been a rebel of sorts in your relationships and had live-in relationships, which obviously for a woman of her generation at that point of time, your late mother perhaps didn't really understand what was going on. But years later, when one of her disciples came to her and said, Guruji, I'm to be betrothed soon and I'm going to get married, she very smugly said, and I could almost visualize it like a storybook, where she said, why do you want to get married? Why don't you just look at live together, explore that? You've always been a rebel, Mallika. You've always been somebody who's never played by the book. And from the family you came from, of course, it was a defiant, feminist, strong family. But your choices, your life choices, was it easy?
Um, that question came fairly early in my life, when I was 12 years old and got into trouble in school for no reason of mine, and got blamed as the girl for having
Hmm.
instigated boys into getting excited about me. And
Oh.
I often tell this story because it was one of the defining moments of my life. Uh, when I was growing up, whenever there was a crisis, Amma invariably was on tour, and Papa was left looking after us. So Papa was called to school by his sister, who was the principal, and told that I had been instigating
Hmm.
boys. And he first got very amused that at 11 or 12 I was instigating anything.
Hmm.
And then he basically sat me down and said that, in society there are two kinds of people. One set follows the rules, doesn't question it. Even if they do question it, they still follow it because they think that that's the right thing to do, or what will people say if they change. And the other set are people who follow their own tune.
Hmm.
And your mother and I are both of the latter kind, but it does mean that you will get stoned,
Hmm.
because society doesn't like change. Society doesn't like somebody who questions the truths of society. So you have to decide what you want to do.
Hmm.
And in some senses, that's when I took the decision that I had to be myself, even if people criticized me or spoke badly about me, because I would rather live with my truth than other people's uh, approval of my lies.
Hmm.
So it's been very difficult. Of course, it's difficult, but I've been fortunate in having people who will squeeze my shoulder and say, this will pass and you've done the right thing.
Hmm.
And it's not easy, but as I said right at the beginning of this conversation, that we have to decide what are the things that really matter.
Hmm. Hmm.
And this is again something I quote often. I was in the film industry in Gujarat, first in the Hindi film industry, then in Gujarat, and I used to smoke.
Hmm.
Uh, and on one of my sets, I was sitting between shots and I was smoking. And one of the Gujarati newspapers wrote, she isn't even shameful enough to hide the fact that she smokes.
Oh. Hmm.
Meaning, for society,
Hmm.
hiding was not the wrong thing,
Hmm. Hmm.
smoking was the wrong thing.
Smoking was, yeah.
Lying about the way you behave, I hear so many people say, oh, मैं अपने parents के सामने कभी smoke नहीं करता.
Hmm. Hmm.
Is that what respect is about, or is truth about respect?
Hmm.
You know, to hide and to live a second life, which is a lie, to me is not about either respect or about love. I mean, your parents might disapprove of you. Amma hated the fact that I smoked, for instance. But I was not going to hide. I didn't necessarily smoke in front of her and blow smoke into her face. But she knew I smoked. I would be on the other side of a room and be smoking. And live in relationships. She knew. She didn't understand at first. And I said that I'm sorry, but I'm not going to lie about it. I am in a relationship. I am in relationships, and that's the way that seems right to me. And I would rather that a relationship broke than that I go through the whole paraphernalia of a marriage and then divorce. As you rightly said, a few years later, she was completely convinced and tried to convince a student of hers, who unfortunately got married. But
And how did you meet your husband, Mallika? How did that happen? And
ex-husband.
Ex-husband, your former husband, and I just find it, in an interview about this show where some of my very esteemed guests or speakers were interviewed in the Hindustan Times. I read your beautiful quote, and because our show is watched by lots of single women from the community, those who want to join the community, they're getting to know that there is a community of women. And we should be, like I say, we are out and proud single women. I love saying it. um how was it, because even now, years later, divorce continues to be such a stigma. I've had women in my community flourishing in their corporate careers, hiding the fact that they are divorced. um, you know Corporate India is very woke. They have paid menstrual leave. They're doing a lot about the empowerment of the LGBTQI community, and well done to the corporates who are putting their sticking their necks out. But women's empowerment has now become part of CSR. you know so I find personally a lot of double speak. When I was trying to fundraise, I shouldn't say was, I still am, trying to fundraise for my summit, which about, which I've discussed so passionately with you. I'm told by corporates, oh my God, it's a summit on single women. So I said, yeah, what's wrong? I mean, it's a community after all, it's a summit. These are the iconic speakers, all of you are part of it. And they go, no, but we don't want to tell women not to get married. We don't want to tell women not to break from their marriages. you know we don't want it to look like an anti-male thing. And I've spent hours talking to heads of big corporations, who are, when you see their advertising, you think them to be women friendly brands, and they just have no clue. And there's a bias against single women. So, you said in the interview to Hindustan Times, and I had lots of people write in about that as well today, how you said that you beautifully co parented your two children, you know, which is, I think, extremely healthy. That the children can have a nourishing, healthy, balanced relationship with both parents. It is not necessary to bash the father and, shame him or
Make them
criticize him
choose.
all the time.
And make them choose. That's
Yeah.
what's wrong.
Yeah. So tell us about that phase, Malika, stepping out of a marriage. Firstly, marriage, for somebody as unconventional as you, it's a cliched term, forgive me for using it. But, the plunge, getting married, being a young mother, traveling with your child, which is, something we see now, mothers putting their children, single mothers, in a creche and going to work, but the percentage is still dismal.
Okay. First of all, I was convinced that I didn't want to get married. That this
Yeah.
was something I'm just not marriage material. I'm too independent. I like doing exactly what I want to do. I like being with whom I want to do. And the only exception that I had put in my head, and I'm talking of 35 years ago,
Yeah.
36 years ago, the only exception I had put in my head is that if I ever meet a man with whom I want a child,
mm,
then I will get married to them. Because I don't want the child to face the prejudices that this society puts, because the child will be facing lots of other prejudices for being my child. This is not a traditional prejudice that I want the child to live with.
ah,
I went to New York. I was running India's first design magazine. I was the publisher. It was called Inside Outside.
mm,
I wanted distribution in America. And a friend said to me, I have a very close friend who is in the publishing business, so go and meet him, which is how I met Bipin.
mm,
Um, and fell in love instantly
mm,
and said, this is the guy I want to actually get married to. Now, Bipin had been a bachelor. He is 9 years older than I am, but he had been a bachelor, wanted to be a bachelor, so he didn't know what hit him either. And within 2 months, we were married. Uh, he and my mother were the ones who actually forced me into taking the decision that I must do the Mahabharata, that it's too good an opportunity to let go, that they would actually be my backup team in every which way, etc., etc. But the same process of Mahabharata, where I became somebody else, also led to the breakup of my marriage.
mm,
It wasn't that, it's just that we had grown apart.
mm,
We had become two different people from the people, and the marriage was very young when I went away. The marriage was only 2 years old, and
mm,
then a 5 year gap. We had started a publishing company together that was doing very well. I was very involved. Revanta was being passed between us constantly. Bipin would come to Paris to be with me or wherever to be with me and so on. But when I came back, I realized that I was no longer the person that could be the other
mm,
half of this marriage.
mm,
But it was very close. So many different factors. Bipin and I were perfectly suited. We were great friends. We both thought the world of Revanta. We were very good co-publishers. Our families were very supportive of us, and so on. So we saw no point. There was a lot of hurt and a lot of pain in the breakup. But I didn't want that pain to translate into negatives where positives existed.
mm,
So just taking being married away,
mm,
it was very important to both of us to let the other 10 things not
mm,
crumble.
mm,
So, for instance, my relationship with his family or his relationship with my family, these are independent relationships and have continued.
mm,
And through the separation process, his sisters were incredibly supportive.
mm,
So, and I was very clear when Revanta would ask that Papa and I don't hate each other. And
mm,
it's not about you. It's just that we become different people, but we both love you very much. And I went through a very difficult phase when we first broke up, when Bipin went to live separately, when in the middle of the night, Revanta would suddenly say, I want to go to Papa.
mm,
And then we had a major domo who would drive him there, or Amma would drive him there, or I would drive him there. And then an hour later, he wanted to come back, and I would get a phone call saying, to come back.
mm,
But we never once said to him, either Bipin or I, that the other person is at fault or that the other person loves you less.
mm,
Revanta was 5 and often would try and protect me. And I would say to him, Daddy, it's all right. Papa hasn't done anything to me.
mm,
So you don't have to take this protective role because
mm,
Papa loves you as much. And
mm,
Bipin and I remain very good friends. We still own the publishing company together. Today, for the last few years, Revanta has gone to live with him. So Revanta and his wife Priyanka live with Bipin. My daughter Anahita is very close to him.
mm,
Uh, and he is very close to my family. Uh, so I don't understand why bitterness has to spill into making the child the
mm,
battleground.
mm,
What happens very often in a divorce is that agony falls upon the child, and that child actually never recovers from those mental uh, traumas.
mm,
And whatever my issues with my children or theirs with me, this is not something that they can ever point to either Bipin or me to say that, you made us choose, or you made us tear
mm,
apart,
mm,
or you made
mm,
us feel that the other person was to blame in the breakup of this marriage.
mm,
Uh, Many, many years later, when Revanta was in university, he came back and he handed Bipin and me an essay he had written. And it was an essay about how he felt for the breakup of the marriage. And he had never spoken to me about it.
Mm.
And he had never spoken to Bipin about it. And it was through that essay that I realized the growth process that he had to undergo. And the conclusion which he came to was that it was for the best. The people that we have become would not have happened. We would have become other people or lesser people had we not taken that very painful decision at that time.
At that time.
And this is important to be able to talk about it even today is important.
Mm. um, again, a beautiful letter like the one I read out to you, amongst the several mails. I won't have time on one show to, and already there are people saying you have to have another episode with Mallika. We are not even, we're not even finished yet.
The courage to become yourself.
Yes, absolutely. So, a beautiful mail actually came in from a lady in the US, and I'm going to read this out to you before I pose my next question. My dearest Mallika, I hope you don't mind adding the word my dearest. I have followed your work. I have seen many of your theatrical productions, both in the US, where I now live, in New York, and in India when I was visiting. My gratitude to you for always taking a tough stand for women. I've been battling a very serious and a very difficult and complex problem for the last couple of years. My daughter, who's 16 and a budding artist, is a lesbian. While I am okay with it, considering the country in which I raise her, where even women are allowed to marry women, I come from an extremely conservative South Indian family. I dread going home because of my daughter's hairstyle, her choices, and the fact that she's always dating women even when she travels. A couple of months ago, when I was reading at night alone with my children sleeping at my partner away on a business trip, I came across a beautiful interview where you spoke about your daughter. Accepting her sexuality not just was an important milestone for you, but seemed like the right thing to do for me as a mother. On Shree's show, please do talk about those moments when you realized that your daughter was not straight and what it meant for you as a mother, as a woman, as a dancer, and as an activist.
I first noticed that Anahita was with women much more. And my concern at that stage was not about her sexuality, but the fact that the women who she was spending a lot of time with were much older, uh, were from an institution that was known for its freedom with alcohol, with weed, and so on. And my concern was that she was too perhaps understand the repercussions. When I did find out, uh, it was fine with me. I will tell you why. You know, we are surrounded by so much hatred that to me, loving is so precious. Loving somebody truly or finding love is so precious that it's really not important who the object of that love is. I have been in relationships which have the disapproval of society. And they have been, for that period, amazing relationships. For her, I want that she will blossom as an individual, that she finds her feet, that if she wants a permanent partner or a long-term partner or a short-term partner, that she finds somebody who gives her the kind of love that she deserves, who nourishes her, who understands her, who can be the shoulder on which to collapse because society is traumatizing you. And really, things like gender, age, which caste the other person is from, which community, what is the color of their skin. If you look at the larger aspect, and I think where we stand today in this COVID pandemic is a very important Atma Manthan space, a space to actually say, you know, we have followed the diktats of the brand managers into saying that my self-respect and my glory is because of the car I use or because of the brand I use. And yet this has been such an incredible leveler that it is at times like these when we really need love, when we need nurturance, that we need to think about what is the societal voice that we are letting poison us. My daughter and I don't see eye to eye. We are estranged. But I want for her all the love that she deserves and she can give. And it doesn't matter who the other person is. I hope she finds somebody who is her equal intellectually or who at least gives her what she wants and lets her become the human being that she needs to be. But to let somebody's mama or somebody's chacha, do you know the number of women who die every day because they did not follow the
Yeah.
need to get out of lousy marriages? Do you know the number?
Yeah.
If they had had the courage to say, enough, I will do whatever. And yet our society wears this demeanor of saying that marriage is where you are protected. It is not. And COVID has brought that. Domestic violence has gone up, I don't know how many times.
Yeah.
Because most marriages are alive only because the husband and wife are away most of the day. And the wife can say, okay, I will tolerate 8 hours of his bossing me around or his beating me up, but at least the rest of the time, I am my own woman or my mother-in-law's woman, whoever. You know what I'm talking about. I'm talking
Yeah.
about. And suddenly they are on top of each other. So sexuality, who you love doesn't matter. If you love a tree, great. If that tree gives you the protection you want, and if you can hug that tree and get its energy, be that tree, be the person. It's so irrelevant, and love is so precious that it's not to be frittered away by social conventions and fears and taboos.
I think it's a huge point, Malika, that you've made. And I know that the lady who wrote into me, all of them are watching, and I'm sure they've been enriched by your thoughts. I'm also placing this in the context of what you just mentioned statistically. We've seen that we just yesterday was, in fact, World Mental Health Day. And I had written a post on, where we keep witch hunting single women, right? And also slut shaming them to a certain extent. But do we know that the highest number of suicides in India amongst women happen amongst housewives in India? The
Of course,
highest,
of
right?
course.
Yeah. And as you said, during the pandemic, the rates of domestic abuse, domestic violence, and child molestation are alarming, right? So these are things that, these are, I think, as you said, the pandemic is a leveler. To me, it's made these inadequacies or these abuses that are so prevalent in society, the pandemic has just put them on the table. Now, there is this current atmosphere of, I think, extreme brutality against women in India. We recently had the Hathras rape. Just yesterday, or I think it was day before, Mahendra Singh Dhoni's 5-year-old daughter was obscenely trolled, given the most heinous, toxic rape threats, acid attack threats, just because his IPL team floundered. We've all sort of harked back to Nirbhaya ever since the Hathras incident happened. And we've also, as you brought up while we were just sort of informally chatting, we've seen the witch hunt of Riya Chakravarti. How national news channels have literally made a fool of themselves and a fool of all of us Indians. And of course, now there's a Mumbai police investigation on 3 channels that how they were trying to buy TRP. You have always taken a very, very unequivocally strong, no holds barred take on rape and the punishment that a crime like rape deserves. What do you feel now, today, in the light of everything that we've seen recently?
You know, two things here. One is our society is so hypocritical that what is of paramount concern to us is log kya kahenge. हम ऐसा बाहर नहीं दिखाते क्योंकि लोग क्या कहेंगे. It can be completely screwed up inside the house as long as we put up a face. Okay? So remember this. So shaming becomes a very powerful tool. The second is that no winning group wants to share power with somebody that they have managed to keep under their feet. So no male or very few men are going to accept a woman's status, a woman's freedom, a woman's freedom of choice, a woman's freedom of status vis-a-vis the marital single paradigm. That's the second thing. Now, I want to give you an example of something. In Vadodara, there is a people's court that runs just outside the formal court. And here, there is a group of women who for years, and I'm talking now of 20 years ago, but for years, every Saturday or Sunday, gathers together, and they are from a vicinity of 100 villages. And any issue of alcoholism or theft or rape or molestation or somebody running away with somebody's wife is brought to this court, not to the official court. I remember being there when I was doing television programming and I wanted to see what this was. We wanted to run a Lok Adalat on TV. I remember being there, group of women and a whole group of people who had been brought to this court. A woman said, "This man raped me." So the man was brought there. And these older women said, "Did you rape her?" We said, "Yes." "Why did you rape her?" "I'm sorry about it." Okay. Turned to the woman and said, "What is it that he has done what is it that you want?" So this was settled. He agreed that he had raped her. She said, "This is the man." They took a photograph of him and they printed 100 posters with his close-up saying, "I am a rapist" in Gujarati. And they put it in every village meeting place. This shamed this man so much that he disappeared from those villages. Now, I have constantly had discussions with women friends, activists, and so on about what the correct punishment for rape is. And I'm not talking rape and murder and rape and acid because that's a whole other thing. I'm just talking the kind of common rape that occurs once every minute or once every second in this country. A rape is about a man's establishing that his penis is stronger than the person he is raping. A man's manhood in this country depends on his penis. So disempower the penis and let them out in society. Because it is that shame which will stop other men from being in that shame. Killing is too easy. Paying a fine is too easy. None of those things are shameful for our men. Losing a manhood for an Indian man is the most shaming thing. Now, I'm sure 1 million people who are listening to this will fall on my head, but I am totally convinced today that it is only the de-manning of a rapist, the public de-manning, I don't mean publicly doing it, but publicly saying this is the punishment, is the only thing that can stop the epidemic as it is increasing today, where 4-year-old, 6-year-old boys are raping 12-day-old girls. It is what every mother does. Arey mard bano. What does that mean? And that is my other plea to women. Stop becoming the foot soldiers of this patriarchal, vapid, toxic society. Each of us, if we decide that we will not partake in this game, then actually significantly changing. 79 million women, you said. 79 million women say, we won't play this game. I'm sorry. We will
Yeah.
not vote for somebody who does not put women on the agenda. We will not vote for somebody who does not say that we will see that the justice system brings a fast track court for every crime against women. We will not vote for a politician who does not say police reforms have to happen today. We are a huge community. And if you forget single women and go to women, we are an enormous community. Why can't we become that change? We will have to, because nobody is going to hand it to us on a platter. For every single step we take, I have to take it. You have to take it. The people watching have to take it. And those few good men who do not feel that their manhood depends on the size of their penis have to be the forebears change. They need to talk to other men. My brother needs to talk to other men to say this is wrong. My son needs to talk to other men as they are making jokes about women, as they are making lewd remarks about women. Men who believe that equality and equity is important need to make this a topic of conversation, to bring this to the fore of other men. Women have to say, stop. I will not participate in this game. It's hard, but being a part of that game is 100 times harder. It's 100, and it's living, it's like dying every moment of the day. At least here it's a jhatka, and you can then get on.
This is, something that I personally completely endorse, and I 100% subscribe. I honor what you're saying. But, this is my next question to you, that you've been a non-conformist in ways that would be considered very, very revolutionary, even for women. Women, maybe not of your family, but women in general. Because, today, in fact, because it was the International Day of the Girl Child, I wrote a post, which a lot of people have reacted to, and I'll share that with you. So, as you know, we foster a girl child, and my sister is 11. And I was just thinking today, that when I was growing up, my mother never openly praised me. Never. I was also extremely fat. So my grandmother, who, was prim and proper, and she was really a paragon of beauty, was always sort of picking on my mother. I mean, with my best interests at heart, but always telling her that make her exercise. I was also learning Bharatanatyam. So my guru was very concerned that I would look like an elephant. And she shamed me many times, being a woman and a guru, which is why I gravitated more towards classical music, because it didn't involve my body. It just involved my talent. And Appaji she didn't care what I looked like, She just wanted me to practice and be a good performer. But, I was just thinking that why didn't my mother ever tell me that I'm beautiful? Even now, when, I keep praising my sister. I love her, and I keep saying, "Oh, Geru, you're so pretty. Dekhi toke ektu ador kori," and she's like growing up now, so she's putting her little lip gloss, and I say, "Wow, you're so pretty. Let me take a picture." And my mother or women of her generation, and even some of my friends who are mothers, say, "Hey, don't say so much. Nazar lag jayega," and they'll bite her, her left little finger and do all sorts of things. And I was thinking that, look at the way women have been conditioned, Mallika. Like I said, we've internalized misogyny, and we've been disempowered to this extent. And very often, like I told you, when, I've been going from door to door trying to fundraise, finding funding is so difficult, I find that sometimes the men want to know more. They say, okay, Shree, come make a presentation. Tell us, what is this community about really? So many single women. Okay, what is they're curious. But I find the greatest resistance the greatest hypocrisy and double standards from women. And there's this thing which is very rampant in the boys' club. You know how they say, "Oh, these women, they just sort of catfight against each other." And women are women's worst enemies. Is that true?
Yes and no. I think human beings are human beings' worst enemies. And patriarchy has done what the British did. They made all the Indians fight amongst themselves so that they could say, oh, these Indians, they always fight.
Hmm.
And that's why I said to all women who are listening to this, stop being a soldier in the army of patriarchy.
Hmm.
I often say this to, I talk to a lot of girls' colleges. I did a huge project with the Kerala State Women's Development Corporation to empower women in a state which had matriarchy, but which seems to have forgotten that completely. And I say to other girls, I say, we have been taught to look with suspicion at another girl who is pretty or who is nicely dressed, because we have somewhere got the script that snaring a husband is our most important job in life. So if I'm with a girl who is prettier, the boy will look at her and not at me, so I mustn't give her any credence. So, for instance, I might go off visual, but you'll hear me because the battery is being changed. Uh, if a very close group of girls is standing in a school, and if one of them comes in dressed differently, it is likely that rather than say how nice you look, they will say, "Oh, अपने आप को ऐश्वर्या राय मानती है."
Hmm.
Why?
Hmm.
I want to say that what you are like does not depend on what the next person is like.
Correct.
I say to your sister, you are unique. And you
Yeah.
were right. You said that somewhere we have misogyny, somewhere we think thin is beautiful. And my daughter taught me this. She taught me about body shaming. And
Hmm.
she taught me, and I wasn't trying to body shame her.
Hmm.
But I do think that for being a dancer, you need to be a certain form. That I do think. And that's a visual aesthetic preference of mine, maybe. I'll come on very soon. But the fact remains that prettiness is also defined by us on a male scale.
Yeah.
It is male gaze that has told us that pouty lips and big breasts and so on and so forth is what makes prettiness. That it is not the uniqueness of the self
Hmm.
that matters. Now, I want to give you the example of an extraordinary woman and a theater director called Betty Barnard, who passed away a couple of years ago. Betty was the head of theater for Pomona University in Los Angeles.
Hmm.
And Betty was a very big woman.
Hmm.
And Betty dressed to kill.
Hmm.
When Betty walked in, you thought royalty had walked in.
Hmm.
The joy that she took in her presence was such that you never ever thought that she would apologize for her size or for the way she was. The sheer joy she took in dressing the way she did, in being who she was, in celebrating her body
Hmm.
was
Hmm.
something that I learned hugely from. And I used to say, "Wow, yeah, it's such a joy, Betty, to look at you." It's such a, जिसको अदा कहते हैं ना,
Yeah.
no apology.
Yeah.
No apology for being who she was. And I think each of us needs to unlearn that male gaze and relearn who we are. And it's something you do all the time. I catch myself doing it sometimes. And I stop myself, I go into my head and I say, where did that thought come from? What past conditioning did that thought come from? And can I remove it? But you need to be constantly talking to yourself and correcting yourself, because what we are is a product of 5, 7, 10,000 years of patriarchy. And it is part of our common gene pool that we need to.
We've had the Me Too movement internationally. Um, what I find interesting when I look at the Me Too movement, perhaps with the lens of a journalist or a sociologist or somebody with an interest in women's history, is most of the women who were victims of sexual harassment at the workplace, who were molested, who were threatened, who retained their shameful silence for years, were all single when it happened. They were young, single, professional, working women. I'm very curious to know about how it was. Of course, uh, your, was your tutelage was under the watchful and the warm environment of your mother and her gurukul. But as a woman, as a performer, as somebody who now runs such a prestigious academy, Darpana in Ahmedabad, who's dealing with young women and men all the time, how come we really never heard much of a whimper of the Me Too movement in the classical dance domain?
Oh, in
Uh,
Chennai, there was a huge furor.
really?
So many musicians and so many dancers have been called out.
Okay.
The north is always subjugated.
Yeah.
In the north, it's the UP Bihari Hindi culture of subjugating women is so much stronger in the
Yeah.
north,
Yeah.
and there you hear less of it. But I have to say that when I went into Hindi films, I was only 16 years old.
Mm, mm,
And I
mm,
had a lot of men trying to make a pass at me, and my
mm,
slapping them or giving them in no uncertain terms that I was not playing this game and that I
mm,
couldn't care less if I didn't get another film role. I
mm,
actually walked out of a movie like that. I was doing
mm,
a film called Hera Fairy with Vinod Khanna, Amitabh Bachchan, and Zeenat Aman. And
mm,
Vinod and I were doing a song on the first day of the shoot on this half built 8-10 story house in
mm,
Bandra, a building in Bandra. And we were doing a song sequence, and the dance director went on making me do the same shot again and again and again and again. And I finally, after about 10 takes, I went to him and I said, why are you making me do this? And he
mm.
said, Are chhati ka dance karo. And I
Oh.
remember picking up the chair that was next to him, breaking it on his head, and walking out of the Hindi film industry.
Mm,
The point very often is there are two kinds of molestation, or there are many kinds of molestation, but there are two large categories.
mm,
One is a category where, for instance, somebody will go into a field like the Hathras girl, pick up a
mm,
woman because she's a Dalit. The woman isn't asking anything in return.
mm,
So she is not beholden on him for her promotion or
mm,
for her next job or for her
mm,
next article or
mm,
for her next film. So that's
mm,
one category where it's just sheer power politics.
mm.
And that men think that they are entitled to pick up whoever they want and do whatever. That's one
Yeah.
type. The second type is where there is, in some senses, a quid pro quo.
Mm,
I think that's different. It might be because you are afraid of losing your job and therefore there will be no food for your family.
mm,
Or it might be because you think that by allowing this man to do this, you will get a break.
mm,
And I think one needs to make a distinction between these two,
mm,
because one is a deal. You think you will get something as a reward if you allow this man to do this with you.
mm,
The other is not.
mm,
So, yes, I'm very glad that the Me Too movement has happened. I'm very glad that these women are speaking up. But it is true that they were probably afraid of losing their job or not being able to sign the next film or not getting the next modeling photo shoot. So, there was that difference.
mm.
It was power politics, but you wanted something in return. You thought something might not come if you didn't allow this. And I think that's a very fundamental difference.
Mm. For somebody who's as outspoken as you are, be it in the realm of gender, be it in devising new ways of looking at history, mythology, culture, just taking a stand against any sort of injustice, be it social, be it cultural, be it moral, be it political. You've received threats, you've been stopped from speaking at public functions last minute. You struggle to keep Darpana afloat. Why is it so difficult for a woman to speak her mind and, like you're saying constantly, be who you are, like own your womanhood, stand up for it, don't fall prey to patriarchy and just operate as their sevak or their pracharak or their foot soldiers? Why is it so difficult, Mallika? What are some of the biggest challenges you faced in your career, which has spanned so many diverse professions in so many years?
First, a disclaimer. Being a Sarabhai was also considered to be such an oddity that people would shrug and say, "Arey, wo to Sarabhai hai, wo to kuch bhi kar legi." That was a huge kavacham that I had.
Huh.
However, having said that, the choices I made, the stands I took, the fact that the entire government machinery was after me, the fact that my passport was taken away, that I had to be in the police station twice a day, every day for over a year, was not part of being that Sarabhai. But Shree, I ask myself why we are alive. Is there a purpose in my life? I think your purpose is very clear. Your purpose is in making this huge group of women who feel belittled, making them empowered. And I think that is your purpose. You have found it and you are doing a brilliant job with it. And I am sure you are continuing to face all the kind of disapprovals, abuse that one faces if one wants to tell the truth, or if one is searching for one's truth, or if one is trying to bring justice to another group of people. But if I don't do that, Shree, why am I alive? What is all this privilege about? If I am who I am because of my DNA, because of my worldview, because of the experiences I have, because of the amazing people I have met, because of the amazing, inspiring people I continue to meet every day. If I cannot have the courage to speak up for people, why am I alive?
There's something that I've always meant to tell you. When we met in Calcutta a year and a half ago, it was after your performance. You were leaving, and I offered to drop you to the airport just because I wanted more of your company. I was greedy for more, and you very kindly obliged, and we had a great mobile adda and chat. I think, as on that journey, and your son Revanta was sitting in the front seat. I was thinking about this throughout that journey. I've never said this to you or written to you about this, that usually in classical music, because I learned Bharatanatyam from Thankamani Kutti,
Who is
the
Darpana?
Kalamandir.
Who is a
Yes.
Darpana? Who started with my mother.
Okay. So I
Husband.
learned, yeah, I
Both.
learned from Yeah, so I learned from her. And of course, at some point, I had to choose because I was really good at music and dance. And I had to choose between an arangatram and Appaji tying a ganda, the official invocation into the Guru's order. And I chose music. But this is something that's always I find this very empowering about you and Revanta is when you both dance together, because usually if you see in the Guru Shishya paramparas or gharanas, where there are children who inherit the legacy, it's always the son. In most cases, there's probably Kaushiki, who's Ajay Chakraborty's daughter, who's continuing. um, in Appaji's case, her daughter Sudha Datta is a Odissi dancer. She didn't take to music, Munnimashi, as I call her. But I find this so powerful that Revanta dances with you. You are the guru, you are the matriarch, and he's carrying forward your legacy. As I don't know if you've ever seen it this way, because it must seem so seamless and organic to you, because you learn from amma, then you passed it on to your children. But for an entire generation of us who learnt music or learnt dance, we always saw the guru's son inheriting it, rarely the guru's daughter. And for you to be a female guru and then to have your son inherit that legacy and share the stage, be in the fulcrum of power with you, to me, it seems like yet another glass ceiling, Mallika, that you've smattered. Have you
You
ever
know,
looked at it that way?
what was really fun is this
Yeah.
show we did called Two Lives in Dance and Two More with Amma and I and Revanta and Anahita talking about legacies and passing on legacies. It was a wonderful show, and three
Mm.
generations dancing together was
Wow.
such a, for me, holding Amma in one hand and the kids in the other and being on stage and doing a tilana together. I mean, I still get goosebumps. It was an
Yeah.
extraordinary, you know, uh, Revanta and I and Amma and I never share an official guru shishya relationship because
Mm.
I never learned directly from my mother till I became a professional dancer. Revanta and Anahita never learned from me till they became professionals, and I started working with them as professionals.
Mm.
So there is a very different kind of camaraderie
Mm.
that comes through,
Mm.
and it is just the sheer joy
Mm.
of being on stage together and and bursting with energy and knowing that the other person is picking it up and that that person has such deep bonds with you, and those
Mm.
bonds are exacerbating this whole chemistry. It's
Mm.
just great fun. It's
Mm.
just great fun. And for me, as I said, Anahita is an extraordinary dancer. She has chosen not to dance, but she's a luminous dancer.
Mm.
uh, and just seeing them is like seeing myself. It's like
Mm.
seeing myself and having an internal smile because I remember and I still feel the sheer joy, the sheer light that rises when I dance. And
Mm.
it's being in an illuminated bubble
Mm.
and in another world. That's what
Right.
it's like.
Right. But this is something that I feel about popular culture, and it wasn't a question that I intended to ask you, but it just came to my mind now. I've always felt that we don't really, like, say, in films, for instance, because you've dabbled that world as well, or theater, or books. A lot is written about fratricide or about the father son dynamic, But I think the mother and daughter relationships are so complex. They're so powerful, they can tear you apart and build you back,
Absolutely.
and they're so primal. Like today, I think, like I wrote about this in my post about, I said, call your daughter beautiful today, but before you do that, look back at your aging mother and call her beautiful, because she was never given that, in all likelihood. So, when you speak about Amma, and I'm going back to that, email which came to me today about you performing the dance for Amma, I'm just curious, to know, as a woman who also has largely been raised by women, about this deeply, tumultuous and emotional, and this, this sort of huge journey of a mother and daughter. You shared it with Amma, now you share it with Anahita. It's two different generations, these are different people. But how has it been, Mallika? If because you mentioned the sight of all of you dancing together, on one stage, and I just, I had a visual. It's also three generations of women of one family.
Sure. My relationship with Amma was exceptional.
Mm.
And as a mother who has a very tumultuous relationship with my own daughter, I revel in my relationship with Amma even more.
Mm.
Amma never made me feel that I was competing with her.
Mm.
I always felt a part of her.
Mm.
So every victory of mine was hers, and every victory of hers was mine. Every time she fell down, I was hurt. And every time I stubbed my toe, she was hurt.
Mm.
Now, perhaps because of the times, Amma's rebelliousness didn't threaten me. Perhaps my being me and being my daughter's mother is by definition a troubling way, because I am still very much my own woman. I am not a mother that has been put on the shelf and needs to be kissed. I am still out there kicking and fighting and voicing my opinions and having strong opinions, having strong relationships, having been in a long-term relationship. Perhaps this is something that Anahita and I need to process over the next few years. She's an extraordinary young woman with great social conviction. But we are in that tumultuous stage, and it hurts me tremendously. I'm sure it hurts her, because for many years we were like two peas in a pod. But I think you are right. The mother-daughter relationship, especially with a mother and daughter who are their own women and who are just mummy and bachi, is one of the most complex. I'm reading a book by an Indian-born, Bali-based writer, which has just been shortlisted for the Booker Prize. I think it's called The Woman in White or The Girl in White Cotton. And it is very troubling, because it is about this relationship that is caused by toxicity in the mother's childhood, and that she visited on the child without ever knowing that she was visiting it on her daughter, and the daughter now having to look after the mother. And it's a brilliant analysis, very disturbing, very dark, but a brilliant analysis of the many layers that one needs to negotiate before actually blossoming as two women of some character.
You've continued Amma's legacy by taking up the reins of Darpana. And in an interview, you say, and I quote, "I think my next 5 years and the next 5 years of Darpana as an institute are going to be committed to working with men, because it's only the men who can stop the violence against women. The good men who have been silent have to get up and shout it out from the rooftops. We need to work with very young boys to make them understand that being macho is cowardly, it's not bravery, that they can be in touch with their emotions. Unless we work with children who grow in this process of socializing that gives them ideas like boys don't cry, it starts at the age of 1. And unless we work with boys and men and parents of boys and men, we are not going to see a change. The kind of sweep we need to see is a 10-year gender sensitization plan that starts right from the top. That is, the Prime Minister and President down to the last rural worker sitting in some village. Unless there is that kind of activity, I hate to use the word on a war footing, just saying Beti Bachao will do nothing. It's nonsensical.
I stand by that.
Sorry?
I stand by that.
Yeah. So, one thing that I feel very strongly, because we've talked about patriarchy on this show, and women being mouthpieces and foot soldiers of patriarchy, is this culture of toxic masculinity. Mard banna hai, virile bano, macho bano. In fact, I remember, I used to host this very popular live chat show in Bangalore called Salon with Shree. And we had a Bharatanatyam dancer called Charles, who was of Chinese descent. And he was also out and proud homosexual man. And Charles said in that chat show where we discussed toxic masculinity, he said that, I was shamed in the dancer community for two reasons. One is I didn't look like a Bharatanatyam dancer. I had, the tip, I hate using that term, but, chinky features. He's short, very fair, not, I mean, he's muscular, but, he's not the Shupurush, that we have been used to seeing in classical dances. He's also literally, that pinkish kind of white complexion. And the second reason, of course, was his sexuality, which he struggled with uh, before he decided to very courageously come out of the closet. And we spoke about toxic masculinity and how even the arts, in a certain way, puts a lid on it. It perpetuates that culture. What are your thoughts on toxic masculinity, Malika? Because I think dance is, or is at least supposed to be, a very gender fluid, barrierless, boundaryless space. But is it?
I think to a large extent it is. Um, in the West, of course, so many of the male dancers are gay, openly gay. In India, more and more of the male dancers, still a tiny percentage, are coming out as gay. And I don't think toxic masculinity is such a basic issue amongst dancers in India, certainly. I think toxic masculinity, as I said, measuring your manhood only through the size of your penis and how many women you can beat up, it is very toxic. And we as women and all of you out there who are mothers can take huge steps in changing that. But yes, I do believe that a 10-year sweep, but that sweep will only come if people realize that it's important. If people realize that what society is doing to women, if men can only think in GDP terms, then the number of GDP points that are being brought down because of violence against women, because of women coming less and less into the workforce, if even that is equated into a change in behavior, so be it. It's actually much more.
As a single woman, yourself, who's been a out and proud single mother, absolutely unabashed in your choices, in standing up for your art and for women in general, what are your thoughts on single women in India? And like, for instance, when I'm asked this question, I always feel, though, I mean, I talk to single women so much, all the time, all day. I feel that we have so much ground to cover. I want to see a day when, I can walk into a corporate and I don't have to explain, which I think is really dumb, why, a single woman is not against a relationship. So many of us have relationships. And like Kamla Bhasin ji said on my show, which she was the first guest on my show on the 10th of September. And dear Kamla Di said, Shree, what's single? What do you mean by single? Just people who are not legally married. But all of us have, a plentitude of relationships around us. You stay with your aging parents, your 11-year-old sister. I'm a woman who's, a senior citizen, a single mother. I lost my daughter and now I take care of my quadriplegic son. What is, maybe the definition of singlehood itself has to be challenged if, we have to take this movement forward.
I agree, because I agree with Kamala intensely. I have to tell you that the artistic director of Darpana, Yadavan Chandran, specially arranged this shot this way because while you are talking to a single woman, there are a million Mallikas behind me in the mirrors.
Yes, I saw that. Yeah. Thank you for that.
So yes, the definition of single, like I said, Bala and Abala, single is seen as lacking something. It's not. Single is seen in terms of, oh, she doesn't have a husband. Hello, that's not the plum on my cake. That's not the cherry on my cake. So the word single itself is a very difficult word because double is seen as better than single. Even if the double is destroying half of itself, it's still seen as better because we have become banyas in our head. Anything multiplied is always better. It's not.
And this whole thing of which I feel very strongly about is, and this is a question I have to you because having watched classical dance, having trained to a certain extent also, like I said, viraha is celebrated. The heroine doing shringar, and like say Shakuntala waiting for Dushyant, reciting a poem to the clouds, and the cloud sort of.
I'm going to stop you here, and this is going to be my last answer. Amma did a Shakuntala in 1973,
Yeah.
in which the usual happens. And when she goes to the court, the king says, "Show me the signet ring."
Hmm.
And Amma's Shakuntala turned to him and said, "You are the king. You show me your signet ring. If I don't have it, you must have it. Where is it?" And she then goes to her father Kanva and says, "You knew what was going to happen. Why did you not warn me?" And she goes to Priyambada and Anasuya and says, "You saw him cursing me. Why did you not tell me? Why did you want to play out the story so that I suffer? I, I am leaving and I denounce all of you." Think of Amma in 1973 doing it. So
I
the answer
think hats
is
off to her.
denounce everything that's wrong and walk away.
Walk away. I think these are powerful words. We've had a fantastic, I don't know when we will be touching 2 hours in the next 10 minutes. I don't know how time flies. It's like that drive to the airport, by the time I dropped you, I said, oh no, why did it come so soon? I had so many more things to say. But thank you, Mallika, for your voice
Thank
and
you.
for being who you are, irrespective of everything that happens or happened or will happen to you, just being who you are. I think you, like I said, I saw you as a young girl at a concert far, far away. And then when you reached out to me and you said that, you had liked Status Single and the story spoke to you, I just thought that, it's almost like so karmic, like a childhood wish coming true, that I wish I knew this woman on stage. There are a lot of comments coming in, a lot of salam and salutes to you. A lot of single women saying that, Mallika inspires us. And Shree, we hope we hope this summit happens so that perhaps we can see one of Amma's
And the
beautiful performances.
Sakrani Amphitheater.
Yeah,
And
and that's
for all the women who have written to me, and any of you whose heart I have been able to touch and give you a little bit of courage, you make my life worthwhile.
Thank you, Mallika. Thank you for being a part of the community. Like I say, the community is us. It's women. It's women like us. Our diversity. One of the reasons I do this show and I try to bring in, for me, like somebody asked me, oh, is it, Women Who Inspire Me series? A stupid male journalist asked me this actually. Oh, so, are you getting famous single women celebrities? And I said, no, I want to change the definition of celebrities. And I want to show the stories. I want the stories of single women icons like Mallika, like Kamla Bhasin, like Vinta Nanda. We've had Srila Dasgupta, diversity and inclusion, a legend in the corporate world who is a woman on a wheelchair. I want for people to see how diverse we are and how inclusive this movement is. So, thank you for adding your voice. Thank you for everybody who's constantly messaging and saying that love the Shakuntala story of 1973. We hope to see it. And like I said, Mallika, I had a dream. I was watching this serial called Mrs. America, which is on Disney Hotstar, and I urge my feminist friends and women of the community to watch it. And on that show, I don't know, I was watching it. It's all about the feminist movement in the US. And I dreamt that I was having the summit at Darpana in Ahmedabad. So I hope, Mallika, we can make that wish come true. Thank you once again. It's been a wonderful adda. And do take care of yourself, and all my love. For our viewers watching, we will be back again on next Sunday, that is the 18th. And my guest is a corporate honcho. She heads marketing and PR for the Taj Group, a woman based in Bombay, a cancer survivor, and her story as a caregiver to her brother and mother, who are also cancer survivors, and her empowering story of never giving up work, of working every day through her treatment and flourishing in the corporate space is absolutely inspiring. Rakhi Lalwani is my next guest. We seem to have lost the connectivity with Mallika, but she's been absolutely fantastic as I had hoped. Thank you all for watching. Please stay safe, wear your masks. People in Calcutta, watch out. The cases are on the rise. Temper down your festive celebrations. And good night. We'll see you again next Sunday at 6:30 on the 7th episode of Status Single with Shree, Season 2, the Women Who Inspire Me series. Good night.